host, Alex Garrett.
All right, well, I have had a revelation here on Alex Garrett Podcast Network, and that is to expand the Alex Garrett Wisdom Talks feature of the network into more than just what I do on the Wisdom app. Yes, you know I'm on Wisdom as well, or if you didn't know, I am there. Alex G NYC on the Join Wisdom app. But I'm expanding that feature to more than just, if there are things that don't fit the one leg up category or don't fit the adapting category, we'll just throw the Alex Garrett Wisdom Talks, because the people I bring on this podcast have a lot of wisdom to share. And again, I am on the hunt. Well, I'm on the lookout for those who want to add to this network by being a content creator on the Alex Garrett Podcast Network. Would love that. Alex at alexgnyc.com. But I want to take a moment because on Instagram for President's Day, AlexGNYC1, I posted a picture with Mr. President Bill Clinton from back in 2000 at the Cardinal's funeral, Cardinal O'Connor's funeral. You might know the story by now, but if you don't, we had known Cardinal O'Connor very well, and then all of a sudden, President Clinton was at his funeral in 2000, and the president came around his pew after the service was over and said, "Hey, buddy," and, got a picture with me. Or I got a picture with him, I guess. And that was put in the Daily News, the New York Post, and whatnot. And the picture I post on Instagram shows Vice President Gore and Hillary Rodham Clinton, literally, in the words of Hamilton, it was like having history have its eyes on me. And I never like to talk like that because I'm just this average rollerblader through New York on one leg, carrying his knapsack home and back to work. I don't feel like eyes are on me 24/7, and I like it that way. But I will say this. I have to embrace the part that does have that, people that want to see where this journey goes next. And how am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to take that opportunity of knowledge and wisdom, if you will, knowing that people are kind of looking at every step I take and liking a lot of things and saying, you know what? Maybe I'll end every post with, hey, I'm not just posting this to show that I was with President Clinton, but I have a message for you as well. And that's to remind you that you too have a damn story to tell. You too have a story to tell on a podcast, on a blog, as an interviewee or interviewer. And if you're a podcaster on Spreaker.com or Apple or Spotify, if you're a host, bring on people whose story would be a change-making story and have them come out of the shadows, if you will. Because life is too short to just sit at home and not tell our stories, right? I unfortunately lost my best friend Max at age of 31 this past January. And that has inspired me to tell, I guess, my own story while I'm here. But now I want to pass that on and say you too, if I can remind you, have a story to tell as well. And so share it. Do that radio show. Host that podcast. Write that blog. Share your story now. You have one life, one chance to do it in this life. Take advantage of that right now. Because, in a way, history has its eyes on all of us. We could be the change maker. I don't want to say inspirational, but we could be the encourager. We, as a podcast host, a blogger, a writer, a radio host, could be the encourager for those that haven't had the guts yet to tell their story. So let's stop posting in vanity and start posting with this message of, hey, I'm posting what I'm up to in my life, but as much as energy as you're spending giving it a like, I want that like to also, with every like, I want you to know that I want you to tell your story as well. Because that's the only way I could think of passing it on is by opening up this microphone to others who have a story to tell. That's what I do on a lot of different podcast features here. That's why we have people like Kevin Miller, who's going to join me this week. We have Lou Terminello, who gives his take. We have just various people in different fields sharing what they're up to because they have a story to tell. And I think it's important to hear that story. And if those stories can hit someone during a day who's listening to a podcast, then hey, maybe others will be encouraged to do the same, to open up and talk. Because I'm sure of all the headlines we see with Biden in Ukraine and the horror in Ohio, there's a current of positivity just waiting to overcome the negativity. And we could be that current. We can be the change makers in our own right by having those whose voice hasn't been heard yet. So let's focus on that. We might podcast vainly. We might post in vanity. We might just share whatever to feel better about ourselves. But if you got the idea that I'm posting just because, hey, I met the president, you didn't. No, that's not the case. And I'm going to start posting with a purpose. That's my commitment to you on this podcast and on this vlog. I'm going to post with a purpose. Not just post and say, hey, I met the president say blah, blah, blah. No, it's to say, hey, I did this, but you know what? I'm sure you have a story to tell as well. So tell that damn story. Tell it to this podcast network. Tell it on Spreaker. Tell it on Apple Podcasts. Tell it on Spotify if you haven't already. And that's the reminder I bring today on President's Day. Is that we, as a host or a guest, can become that current of positivity that wipes out the negativity that we see every day on our TV screens, and yes, hear it on our radios, and yes, hear it on our notifications, and scroll, doom scroll, if you will. We can break that current and create a new one and say, no, here's a story that you might want to hear about, and it's never been told before by someone who was afraid to tell their story. Now they're not. Because one of us as a podcast host reached out to that person and said, I want to interview you. You've been telling this off the record for so many years. Tell it on the record. Get it out there for people to be inspired by you. Be encouraged by you. And that way, this podcast and every other podcast is not done in vain just to hear ourselves. Or some believe that anyway. But in a real purpose. We can podcast with a purpose. We can post with a purpose. We just have to realize that as someone with the microphone, yeah, people's eyes are on us. And people's ears are on us to see what we post next. And we've got to post with the right intentions. Not just babbling brook, if you will. But with right intentions. And I'm going to be dedicating that to my podcast every day. Even if it's just myself, I want to tell encouraging stories too. Of others, even if they're not interviewed. But just stories we find that aren't being talked about, but should be. That's my commitment here on Alex Guerra Podcast. To serve as a reminder that if it can be easy for you to share your story too. You just have to find the right platform. And maybe the Alex Guerra Podcast Network, maybe a Spreaker channel, maybe a podcast channel in general is the right platform for you. So start it up today. And don't wait. President's Day, huh? I hope you're having a great 3-day weekend. But seriously, if you're a podcaster, podcast with a purpose. Don't just rant and rave, but podcast with a purpose. I'm going to start working on that as well, even more so, knowing that, yes, history does have its eyes on those who host in any medium. Now we've got to embrace that and run with it and pay it forward. And that is my reminder today. So may I remind you, you too have a story. And share that story today. We'll be back later this week on Alex Garrett Podcasting, and have a great rest of your President's Day.